Okay. How do we start it?
Well,
Yeah, do you want to introduce yourself?
well, you ought to tell them what day it is and
Oh yeah.
Okay, good job.
where we are.
Do you just put that like this?
Yeah, I think that's the record. I don't know. I think that's the microphone right
Okay.
there.
Today is September 17th at the farm,
But what year is it?
2022. Do you want to introduce yourself? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, no.
When were you born?
I was born August the 6th, 1933.
Where?
Where? At Effingham, Kansas. In a house.
In a house?
Yes.
Not a hospital?
No, not a hospital.
Did the doctor come over?
I think maybe he did, but I don't know. And I think Mother had a friend that was Mrs. Maud Garrett, was her name. She was a big lady, big
Bone.
bone. Or as Carol says, she was not that slender lady.
Okay.
Is it you or Grandma that says the other quote about big bone women?
No, that was, I don't know. That must have been me. But the house that I was born in was later, it was right by the Fair Barns. And they expanded the Fair Barns and tore it down. Now it's a hog house.
A hog house?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was maybe a 2-bedroom house, and I was the 6th child.
Did your dad build that house?
No.
It was built.
No, he rented it.
What was the house like? Can you describe it?
Well, I don't remember. We moved from that house when I was 3 years old,
Okay.
and it was it was really a rundown place.
Were you baptized
Yes.
as a baby?
Yes.
Do you remember what priest?
Father Paul Behrens.
Okay.
And my baptismal sponsor was my dad's brother, Henry. I think that's where I got my middle name of Henry.
Okay.
Henry was a barber in Everest, Kansas. And his son got polio, and so he had to move because nobody would go into his barber shop because they thought they'd get polio if they
Mm,
went into his shop.
that's sad. And you remember that?
Pardon me?
You remember that?
No, I was told that.
Okay. Oh yeah. How many rooms were in that house? The second house you moved to?
The first house or the second house?
Either.
Oh, the first house, maybe there was a kitchen and 2 bedrooms and an outside privy. That was all.
Like an outhouse?
Yes, an outhouse.
One running water and heat?
No.
None of it?
No heat. Well, the heat was a heating stove. But I think we burned coal in it.
Wow.
In the second house, how big was that?
The second house was out on, the second house, my dad bought it. We rented that little house where I was born, but Dad bought the second house. And I don't know, I think he paid maybe $1,300 for that house and 40 acres.
Wow. Was that house nicer than the first one?
Yes, it was much bigger. And there was no running water. And there was no central heat or air conditioning. But there was an outdoor privy. But there was a pump right on the back porch. And we could either pump water out there or we could pump it by pipe down to the cattle tank.
Oh, wow.
From a
So,
well?
yeah,
So was that like a chore
yes.
to go get the water?
Well, we had to go get the water. Well, the water we drank in the house was in an oaken bucket.
Mm.
We just had a dipper, and everyone would dip their water out. And whatever was left in the dipper, you put back in the bucket.
My gosh.
Yeah.
When did you get running water? Do you remember that?
When we moved to town, when I was a freshman in high school.
Okay.
When you moved into Effingham?
Yes, yes.
So you were outside of Effingham up
Right,
until that point?
Right. Yes.
Okay.
Maybe a half a mile from the city limits.
And the second house had how many bedrooms?
It had maybe 4 upstairs and 2 downstairs.
Okay. And how many kids?
7 children.
Do you remember when your little sibling was born?
No, I don't remember.
How old were you?
I was 2.5 years old.
Okay. Do you have any memories with your siblings? Like, what was your favorite thing to do?
My favorite what?
Thing to do with your siblings as a kid?
Oh, my brother Carl was really a cut-up, ornery guy.
Yeah.
And so he was always fun to play with.
Aw.
But my brother John was 5 years older than me. And he was like a big brother to me. And he was probably the smartest.
The smartest.
Yeah.
What kind of like games did you guys play?
Well, we had one or more steel rings from a wagon wheel, and we'd make a stick we'd make a pusher that was in a cross shape out of 2 sticks, and we'd roll those rings up and down the driveway. And sometimes we'd play ball.
How do you win that game?
Well, there was no winning or losing.
It was just something to do.
Yeah,
When you weren't doing chores?
yeah.
And you'd play ball?
Yes, we played ball,
What kind of ball?
You go wash your hands?
baseball.
That's fun.
Were any of you guys very athletic? Who was the most athletic?
Well, I was a high school quarterback on the varsity for 2 years,
Okay, King.
I didn't know that.
but it
Did
was
girls
a,
have crushes on
it
you?
was a small
Be honest.
school. What?
Did girls have crushes on you?
I don't think so. I didn't know it if they did. I'm sure they must have. Now that I think about it.
So, what were you just talking about? You were the quarterback?
Playing games.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think my dad would let Carl play ball.
Why?
He thought he'd get injured.
What was
And he was needed, he didn't want to get injured because he needed help on the farm?
Well, he didn't want him to get injured because he thought he'd have to pay a doctor to cure him.
Why did he think Carl would get injured more than you?
Well, I think he was reluctant to sign my paper.
Oh.
I think my mother finally talked him into it after I threw a tantrum and fit.
Were you a tantrum thrower?
Yeah, I guess. I don't know.
Really? I was gonna ask, what were you like as a child or a teenager?
Well, when I was really young, they couldn't get any food to agree with me. And mother's milk would not agree with me.
Oh.
So the doctor prescribed dextromaltose, which is a sweet thing. So I got to eat that. I got to drink that dextromaltose. I think it was a powder, and they'd mix it with milk or something. So I got to eat that, but the rest of the kids, they wanted that because it was sweet.
It was like sugary and...
Yeah.
Was that a problem for your whole life with food?
No.
No, just when you were little.
No. I don't even remember that.
Oh, okay. Do you were you ornery, or was it just your brother?
It was just my brothers.
What was your mom like?
I wonder what your brothers would say about that.
Yeah, I think he's lying.
Well, my mother was really a hard worker. See, well, they just didn't have any. We had a washing machine, but she'd have to carry water. She'd have to put water in a boiler on the cook stove to get it hot. Then she'd have to transfer that to the washing machine and put clothes in there, let it run for a while to get them clean. She'd have to wring them out by hand because the washing machine had a wringer, but she didn't feed it.
So was you guys had electricity but not running water?
Right. Yeah, we had electricity there.
Do you remember
Okay.
when you got running water?
Yes, when we moved to town.
Oh,
moved
okay.
to
So
town.
this is
But-
still in the.
So you had electricity since you were born?
I think so.
Okay. That adds up.
I think so.
Will you tell the story about how your mom was kind of ornery towards your dad?
Well, I, well, I just remember her telling some stories. She told one story about my dad. My mother lived 3 miles from Effingham. And on a date, they were going to town in a horse and buggy, 3 miles. The only thing my dad said was there was a rabbit run across in front of the horse. My dad said, "There goes a rabbit." That's the only thing he said going to town. The only thing he said going home was another rabbit run across. Said, "There goes another rabbit."
And your mom would joke about that?
Yeah, but I don't know if that actually happened or if that was her invention. I guess.
Was your dad pretty tight-lipped?
Yes, he was. He was pretty serious, but but I guess he thought he had to be with 6 boys.
Yeah. What was he like on a day-to-day basis? Did he play games with you guys?
No.
No?
Well, after we moved to town, I couldn't get anybody to play catch with me even.
Aw.
So he would stand out in the street and hit me fly balls. I'd stand way up on the corner and I'd chase these fly balls down. And that's about the only time I can remember him playing games.
That's fun.
But I think when he was a boy, he played baseball.
Okay. Did you guys listen to baseball at that time?
No,
Watch?
no, we didn't. But some people, no, nobody had television then. But some people did listen to the St. Louis Cardinals. Because
Okay.
at that time, St. Louis was the farthest western professional baseball team.
Oh, wow.
So there weren't any teams west of there because they had to travel by train. Those teams did. And they just didn't have any teams farther west than St. Louis.
Wow. So did you guys, your dad didn't follow baseball, but he liked baseball?
Yes, right.
Okay. And you told me he was very, stoic.
He was.
What did he do for a living?
He was a trucker. He had a truck line. He had 3 or 4 trucks, and he'd haul livestock from a farmer's place into the market at St. Joe, Missouri. And he'd cross a toll bridge at Atchison across the Missouri River. It was a privately owned bridge, and I think it cost him 25 cents to go over and back one day. And that 25 cents, that was a pretty dear price.
Yeah. A privately owned bridge.
And he held grain to the elevator, and and he'd haul grain to people's bins, and he did that until the war was over, until World War II was over, until about 1946. Then he sold his trucks, and then he bought a grocery store.
Yeah.
Was it pretty lucrative during World War II to be a trucker?
Well, I guess it was. I think so. But all the time he was a trucker, we had livestock. See, we had this 40 acres of pasture. So we had milk cows. We had maybe 10 or 12 milk cows.
Who did that?
We did, the boys did that.
Like every morning or something?
Every morning and every evening.
I was gonna ask you to take me through like a typical day in your life when you lived with your family.
Well, we'd get up, I think, and go out and do chores. Then come in and eat breakfast.
What
Well-
were the chores?
Well, the chores were milking,
Okay,
and mostly milking.
okay. What was breakfast?
Breakfast was pancakes, and
Ooh, syrup?
syrup, and sorghum. And
Love that.
my mother would, when we were out cooking, well, my mother had to get up in the wintertime. She'd have to break ice in the water bucket.
Oh my gosh.
She'd have to build a fire in the cook stove. Then she'd have to cook pancakes, fry pancakes. I think she'd fry with maybe 3 skillets. Because when we'd come in from doing chores, she'd have a stack of pancakes.
Oh,
We just go
that's the life.
So do you think she got up when you all got up? To
Even
do that,
that-
or did she get up earlier?
She got up maybe before that.
Really?
Wow. Did you always appreciate how hard she worked for
No.
you guys?
No.
What made you appreciate it?
Well, just looking back on it, comparing it with modern women.
Yeah. Yeah.
Heck, comparing it
So-
to a modern man.
Yeah.
Comparing it to modern man, yeah.
So you'd eat pancakes. And then,
And then we'd go to school.
mhm.
We'd walk to school or ride a bicycle. We had one bicycle.
One
Yes,
for the whole family?
yeah.
Okay.
Well, what I remember is that Don and Jerry and I went to grade school. And that was about a mile from where we lived.
Okay.
And it was uphill going to school.
Both ways.
No, but it was downhill coming home. So I remember that sometimes we would ride 3 on the bicycle. I'd have to sit on the handlebars,
My
Somebody
gosh.
stand on the back.
and somebody would know. That was before they had those.
Yeah.
Somebody would sit on the bar between the guy on the seat and the handlebars.
Ow.
Sit side saddle.
My gosh.
We go down that hill
You
like
probably looked like a circus.
crazy. And I think I did this. The road outside our house was the highway, and I think that I rode that bicycle, and I tried tricks on it. I'd try standing up on the seat. As soon as I let go of the handlebars, I'd crash.
Did you have any bad falls?
Well, I did, I guess.
None that went to the doctor.
No.
So, when you went to school, what was your school like?
Well, the school was a 2-room school. There were 4 grades in each room.
Wow.
And we had Benedictine nuns from Atchison taught it. And now Benedictines would send 3 nuns out. 2 of them would be teachers and 1 would be a cook. And if you ever had a chance to go over and get into their house, they had a convent or a house where they lived. That cook would cook rolls, and God, they were good smelling.
Do you think you got a good education?
I guess I did. I don't know. But that school did not. It had plumbing, but it did not have an indoor bath. So we'd have to go outside to use the bathroom.
So it had like a
gosh.
faucet.
Yeah, it had a drinking fountain.
Yeah.
Mm. So, you'd ride your bike or walk home from school,
Yes.
and then would you eat
And then
dinner?
we'd do chores.
More chores?
Yeah.
What chores?
Milk.
More. Okay.
Milk and feed the hogs and feed the chickens.
Was it scary to feed the hogs?
Well, it was if you didn't know how.
What's the right way to do it?
Well, you have to stay out of their pen. Because if you get in their pen with feed, they'd knock you over,
Really?
Because hogs will, like,
chew on you.
yeah. Ugh.
That never happened with us.
And then after chores, would you go in?
Then
and-
after chores, we'd go in the house and eat, I guess. Yeah, I think we ate after chores, ate supper.
What was there like a usual supper or like a favorite supper?
I don't know that, I don't remember a favorite. But quite often, well, we'd always have potatoes because we grew them.
Okay.
And we store potatoes in the basement, in our basement of the house. And sometimes they'd get rotten and they'd smell bad.
Oh, I'm sorry if this is a dumb question. Did you have a refrigerator your whole life?
I think so.
Okay.
I think we did.
Because you had electricity.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So you eat supper, normally potatoes. Did you have dessert
On Sundays,
on Sundays?
yeah.
What was it usually?
A pie, maybe.
Ooh, homemade?
Yes. Everything was homemade.
Yeah. And then, did you guys have to do like you had a day that you took a bath once a week?
Yes, Saturday night.
And wow.
And we had a bathtub, but we had to carry water to it. And so we'd heat water in the boiler on the cook stove. And we'd carry that in and pour it into the bathtub. And then, I guess 7 of us, maybe 9 of us would go through there.
And not change it?
I don't know if we changed it or not.
That's so interesting. So, then you'd eat supper and would you just go to bed after that?
Well, we'd eat supper. No, we had a radio. And a
Oh.
radio then was like a piece of furniture, you know, it was really something. So everybody would gather around the radio after the homework was done. And we'd listen to programs like Fibber McGee and Molly, and
Feebler McGee?
Fibber McGee and Molly.
Okay.
And they had and Jack Benny had a show. Jack Benny had a black guy that they called, what'd they call him? Anyhow, Rochester.
Okay.
And Rochester was just like a black person would be. I mean, he was a servant.
Okay.
And in those days, that passed. There wasn't anything like.
So it was like a sketch show?
It was there were comedy shows. Jack Benny was a comedy show.
Okay.
But I think my mother would watch or listen to As the World Turns, which was a soap opera.
Oh,
And I think it's still going. I think it's still on the air.
on the radio?
No, on television.
Oh, wow.
But then, you know, we didn't have television then. So someone, I don't know who, not me, could pick out the show, the program that we'd listen to on the radio.
Oh,
Maybe we could get WIBW from Topeka
okay.
and maybe 2 or 3 channels from Kansas City. That was the radio. It was all AM, no
FM.
no FM.
Wow.
Was it a treat that you guys had a radio? Was that a...
Well, I think most people had a radio, but I guess we were better off than some people were.
And then, would you go to sleep after you listened to the radio?
I think so.
And did you share a room with anybody?
Yes, Don and John and I slept in the same bed.
Did you fight?
Upstairs. But John had slept between us because we wouldn't fuss with him because he was 5 years older than me.
Oh. He kept you in line?
Yeah. and in the wintertime, it was really cold up there. In the summertime, I guess it was hot up there.
Oh my gosh.
You guys ever sleep in the basement in the summer?
No,
No?
no.
Too many rodents?
Well, we just didn't have any beds down there.
I just meant because it was cooler.
It was cooler, but but we just never did do that.
Did you and your siblings ever fight?
Yes.
Like bicker?
Well, I don't know if we'd actually come to blows, but we'd argue a lot.
Yeah. Did you have a telephone?
Yes. Yes, we did. We had a telephone. Our number was 41.
Was it a share line?
No.
It was a direct line?
Yeah.
That was a big deal.
4-1.
Yeah. And I think it was that because my dad used it for business. And see, I don't think anyone filed income tax returns. I know they didn't before World War II. Well, the income tax law was passed in 1916, but it only affected just a few people in the country. And I don't think my dad filed an income tax return maybe until after the war. But how'd I get started on
I don't
that?
know. We're talking about phones.
Oh, the
For
phone.
business.
Oh yeah, the phone. Well, the phone. See, if you wanted to call someone, you'd spin the crank, lift up the receiver, and then there was a woman called Central, and she'd connect you with whoever you wanted to talk to.
So
you'd-
someone was calling your dad, they'd say to Central, like, I want to call 4-1. And
Or
she
they'd
could-
call John Kuckelman.
Oh.
And then they moved the cable, right?
Yeah, and then they'd plug it in.
Wow.
And sometimes you'd call and say, I want to talk to Joe Blow, and they'd say, well, okay, but Joe's not home. I just saw him go by.
That's crazy.
But wasn't it pretty common in those times that you had a shared line?
Yes,
So like 4 houses might share the same number.
right.
And it's just a gamble if the right person's going to pick up the phone.
Well, they had so many rings. They didn't have the same number, but they would share a line, and you could tell by how the rings were. There were short rings and long rings. So your number might be 2 longs and 1 short, or 2 shorts and 1 long. And but sometimes everybody would pick up. Some busybody woman would pick up the phone and just listen, see what was happening.
Eavesdropping.
Yeah.
Did you guys have a car?
I don't think so. I don't think we had a car until maybe we moved to town in 1946.
Wow.
Oh,
So
do you remember the car?
I think it was a LaSalle, which is an off-breed Cadillac, and I think my dad went to Atchison and bought it.
what color?
It was red,
Ooh.
and I think he bought it from a black guy
Okay.
because we said it looked like an Ann car,
Oh, what?
an Ann's car,
Oh.
because it was a big, heavy, flashy car.
Oh.
And there were some rich black people lived in Atchison.
In Atchison?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Effingham is a town in Atchison County. And I think when I was young, the city had a city marshal. And I think he shot himself. I don't know if it was accidental or on purpose.
What does city marshal mean?
Well, he was just the law people. He was,
Oh, like a police officer?
yeah. Right.
Okay.
But then when he died, then I think we just relied on the county sheriff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But hardly ever was the county sheriff in Effingham.
But Effingham was relatively small, right?
It was 500 people,
Okay, yeah.
and I think it still is.
Dirt roads or gravel roads?
Well, in town, I think there were some gravel roads, but the main street was paved. Well, the main street was a highway,
Okay.
a state highway. And I think on Wednesday and Saturday nights, the store would stay open and all the farmers would come into town. And maybe each kid would get a nickel or something. That was really big time.
Yeah? What would you get?
Oh, an ice cream bar. Or,
Ooh.
Did you work in the grocery store?
yes, but they wouldn't let me handle money.
Mm.
So in those days, nothing was wrapped. I mean, candy and cookies and everything was just bulk.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody wanted to come in and they'd buy a pound of cookies, then one of the clerks, either my mother or my aunt, would just go over and get, some and put it in a sack for them. And they'd run charge accounts
Mm.
because some people couldn't pay until they got paid. Some people couldn't even pay then.
So, like, because farmers would invest a ton of money at the beginning of the season with the hopes of getting paid. Yeah.
Well, the farmers, I think, what I remember was the townspeople that couldn't pay.
Oh.
Can we backtrack a little and can you tell me about your grandparents?
Well, on my father's side, my grandfather came from Germany
Mm-hmm.
in about 1980, I think. And he and his brother came together, and they stopped in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he worked for a while. And he married a woman named Wiggeringlow. Elizabeth Wiggeringlow was her
Okay.
name. She was also a German immigrant.
Okay.
And then in 1913, my grandfather died. But before he died, he moved the town up to Seneca, up in Nemaha County, Seneca, Kansas.
Okay.
And they had 8 children, I think. And my dad was towards the youngest of that group. And but their oldest son was a guy named Theodore, and he left the farm and went to Michigan. And he was a public speaker. He gave speeches to the Optimist Club. He
Is
worked
your
for
uncle?
oil companies. I don't know what he did, but he was really successful.
A
Wow.
lot of money.
Yeah. And and 2 of those girls moved to Sedalia, Missouri, and married guys there. One was a barber, and one was a loan guy, savings loan guy. And another girl married Joe Molman, who was a German immigrant. Joe Molman, he couldn't speak English. And he listened to baseball games on the radio.
Mm.
And Henry was a barber. And Joe was never married. And Joe was drafted in World War I.
Oh wow. These are your uncles and aunts, right?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
They're my dad's siblings.
Okay.
Well, the draft board came and talked to my grandmother and said, you have to send one of these boys into the army. Which one? And I don't know how she decided.
That is
or
a
if she did
terrible
decide.
decision.
Yeah,
The boys you think any of the boys had a decision, had a say in it?
I don't know.
Did anybody want? Because didn't your brother Carl want to go in?
That was a different generation, a
He's
different
talking about
war.
World
No,
War
I know,
Oh.
but that's what
Yeah,
I'm
he
saying.
did.
That
He
same,
enlisted.
was that same desire there? I wonder in World War One.
Or he like volunteered.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Did you know Joe
Yes.
well?
Yeah, pretty well.
Did you
If
notice at like that he was off after the war or anything?
No. No, and he didn't see combat.
Oh.
He was stationed at Fort Riley. He handled horses
Okay.
because he was a horseman.
Not a bad spot.
No, and in those days, anybody could handle a horse. That was a pretty high mark.
Okay.
And on this place by Seneca, I went to visit it a few years ago. But they had a rock quarry. See, they did not have rock grinders then, so gravel was really scarce. But this was a natural gravel pit that they had on their place. So they'd sell gravel to farmers. They'd sell them by the load. So these farmers would back their wagon down into this gravel pit and load it up with all they could get on there.
Mhm.
And the
They
horse,
pay by the load.
yeah, because they paid by the load, 50 cents a load.
Oh my
So
gosh.
then their horses could not pull it out. So they'd come up to the house and they'd get Joe or my dad, and Joe would always insult them. He'd say, "You want me to pull them out with your horses or mine?" And it would really be an insult if Joe go down there and drive their team out and they could not.
Oh yeah.
But
He
Joe,
was so good with horses, he
yeah,
could do it.
yeah.
Was was he around a lot? Was he like your
Well,
closest?
he came and visited us since he was a bachelor. He came and visited us and kind of helped us do chores and put up hay and do things.
That's nice. What about your grandma? So your grandpa died. She had to
And
raise
I-
all those kids by herself?
Yes. Well, yeah. But she must have been good wood because, well, I don't know. I started to say they all turned out all right. Well, I forgot to tell you about Josephine. She was another sister
Okay.
that lived at 3930 Tracy Street in Kansas City, Missouri.
Okay.
And nobody would be caught dead there now. And she would come out to visit us, and she was kind of bossy, kind of.
Did you like her when she came around?
Well, she was all right, but I didn't care. But she came out to see if we were still eating and still had food, and I think we had more food than she did.
She thought because she
But-
lived in the city.
But my brother John, he had a chance to go to West Point.
West
And-
Point?
West Point. And he turned it down.
Why?
Well, he said he'd had to serve 4 years there and then agree to 4 years in service. He didn't want to be in the Army for 8 years.
Do you think that worked out for him? That was a good choice for him?
Well, that's what Josephine thought. Josephine came out and just gave him hell. Said, "John, you could have been an Army officer." And John said, "I didn't want to be an Army officer." He said, "But John, there's nothing to do in Effingham. What are you going to do here?" He said, "I'm not going to stay here. I'm going to go to KU." And he did. He got an education degree. He came back to Effingham and taught high school there. And when I was a senior in high school, he did graduate teaching, student teaching. So he and I had a history course together, I think
Oh,
it was.
really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
And he one day he said, we're going to have to change our ways because you and I do all the talking. Because we'd argue about politics.
So
Anyhow.
you really admired John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess that's all about Josephine. And, well, my dad's uncle, my grandfather's brother, his name was Theodore, and he had a family, and he bought a farm next to my grandfather's place.
Oh.
And they have a doctor. They have a descendant of that guy now is a doctor in Lawrence. In
Oh,
Lawrence,
yeah. Monica's
Oh,
gone
okay.
to him.
yeah.
Cool.
And Father Germain was a cousin, a first cousin of my dad. Father Germain was a Benedictine priest.
Okay.
And I one day said, "Dad, Father Germain isn't very smart. He wouldn't have to be very smart. He's just a farm boy." And he said, "Oh, he was pretty smart." But that crowd, that family, well, I guess both families have done well. Well, my dad's family, my dad's grandchildren, they all did well.
Yeah.
They're all way above the average. Average,
You mean like our dad and his cousins?
yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
It's a pretty good lot.
yeah, yeah.
Might have
And-
peaked right there.
What?
Might have peaked at that generation.
Yeah. From
Downhill.
then on, it went downhill.
Yeah.
But no, it didn't. But somebody circulated a picture. Maybe your dad did of one of Don's sons, who is now a senior. He is the senior financial officer. No, maybe he's
Oh,
the CEO.
Tim. Yeah, he's
CE
CFO.
CFO.
Tim
CFO or
Kuckelman.
CEO
For what?
of a big company, and they showed a big sign on a, looked like it was in Wall Street, didn't it?
Mhm.
Huh?
And
It was
said,
like a big deal.
and it said, what's that kid's name? Let's see, there's,
But the name Kuckelman was
yes,
printed somewhere.
Is it
big?
not Tim or
Tim.
Ted?
It's Tim.
Tim?
No, it's Tim. Said Tim Kuckelman, CFO.
Did you feel famous?
Biggest our
I
name's
did.
ever been.
Yeah, that's the high spot right there. That's the apex.
What about your mom's parents?
My mom's family.
Yeah.
She was one of maybe 6 kids. Her oldest, she was next to the oldest. Her oldest sister married married George Lemke. George Lemke had a daughter who was in high school and got pregnant. Imelda was her first name, and and they just disowned. Well, they didn't disown her. But she dropped out of high school and that was, and old George Lemke, I think probably prohibited her from marrying a guy.
Right.
But that was really a bad deal for
Scandal.
Imelda. Huh?
Was it a scandal?
Yeah, it was scandalous in those days. And then was my mother. Was her first name was Margaret. My mother was the pick of that litter.
Okay.
And I think my dad was the pick of his litter.
Yeah?
But then Lenora and Annie and Frank, they never married. And Frank fell off a wagon, they said, and impaired his ability. So those girls wouldn't let him drive or do anything. So the
Oh.
poor guy didn't marry, and I think he was okay, but they just treated him like an invalid.
Okay.
But he was a farmer, and my mother's father's name was Frank Sauer. No, Francis Sauer, and my grandmother's name was Elizabeth Sauer.
That's a pretty
Elizabeth
name.
Martinoski was her maiden name.
Martinoski?
Yes, Martinoskis I think were from Bohemia or somewhere.
And she was German, right?
Who was
Your grandma?
Martinoski?
Yeah.
Well, I don't think so.
Oh, your mom was.
My grandmother was German
Okay.
on my father's side.
Gotcha.
They were all German,
Oh,
but
okay.
on my
I'm
mother's
tracking.
side, I think it was Martinoski.
Okay.
And if you would have this interview with my brother Don, he'd give you a lot more information.
Okay.
Because I was really afraid of adults.
You were?
Yeah. So when somebody'd pull in our driveway, I'd go hide behind the barn.
Were you bashful?
Yes,
Oh my gosh.
I still am.
Yeah. That's what you're known for. Did you have a job when you were in high school?
Yes.
What was it?
Well, only in the summertime. In the wintertime, I just did chores at home.
Okay.
Well, but when I was in high school, we lived in town. I didn't have many chores to do. But in the summertime, I think the first summer I worked on we did a custom hay baling. And it was a case baler, and it was a 3-man crew. One guy drove the tractor, and another guy sat on one side and poked wires through the bales. And I sat on the other side and tied the wires.
Oh my gosh.
And we did that all summer. And wherever we were at lunchtime, that's where we ate lunch. Man, I would really chow down. Because that,
Did the people who you were working for, they fed you?
yes.
Yeah.
And there was always a hay crew there to pick up our bales, because they didn't have big bales now like the handle with machinery. So these bales had to be picked up by hand and put on a wagon,
Wow.
then carried into a barn and towed into a barn. And before, pardon me?
Square bells?
Well, it was south of Effingham. It was,
No.
What shape?
square bales. They were square bales.
What was your uniform? What'd you wear while you did that?
Well, I wore long sleeves because wanted to keep the dirt off of the
Yeah.
chaff, the hayseed, the hay off of me.
But was it so hot in the summer?
Yes, it was so
doing
hot
that?
in the summer. And at night, I lived there. I stayed there. The guy that poked the bales, and he was the brother of the owner that I worked for. So he and I stayed there at night until the weekends, and then I'd go home on the weekends. But we'd take a bath in a wash tub, just with about that much water in it. And I know that lady's sheets were just black.
Ew. That's gross.
And at that time, my folks owned a grocery store. So this guy fussed with me. He said, I have to pay you to work for me. My wife has to go in and buy groceries to feed you from your dad.
True. Full circle.
Yeah.
How much did he pay you?
A penny a bale. And so if we'd get 300 bales, that was $3 a day. And
Was
that
that
was
a
a
lot?
lot of money.
Okay.
That was
Was it a penny each? Or
penny per bale.
per guy?
Yes. Well, I don't know what the owner did. I think the owner got maybe 10 or 12 cents a bale, and he paid me 1 penny. I don't know what he paid Bob that poked the bales, that poked the wires. But one day, Bob always chewed tobacco. So he said, you want to chew this? If you have some of this in your mouth, you won't swallow any of this dirt. So I said, yeah. So I took a big bite of that. So that juice rolled down I fell off the baler. That baler just lifted up and flew. And I fell off. It stopped and come and get me.
Were you guys buddies, you and the guy you worked with?
Well, not really buddies, but he was a couple years older than I was.
And then when did you work at your parents' grocery store?
Well, just when after school maybe, and when I wasn't doing anything else.
Did you like working there?
Well, I guess. But they sold vinegar out of a 55-gallon wooden keg. And people would bring that was before plastics, so people would bring in their glass jars, and we'd take their gallon jug and take it back and open the spigot and fill it full of vinegar, and
Oh my
they'd pay
gosh.
us for a gallon of vinegar. But when that barrel got empty, we had to move a loaded barrel from the basement upstairs. That took 3 of us, my dad and Don and I, all 3 of us, to get that
Oh.
barrel up the stairs.
Why did everyone have so much vinegar?
Well, they cooked a lot, they canned a lot, and they canned pickles. I think that takes vinegar.
Maybe for cleaning too? I know
I
people
don't
clean
know.
with vinegar.
I don't know. I know I just had barrel duty.
Right. Would the grocery store look like completely different from a grocery store now?
Oh, yes.
Like
yes.
what differences?
Well, for one thing, nothing was wrapped. Yeah.
Probably into the chain on it.
Everything was unwrapped. And if somebody would come in the store and they'd say, I want a can of peas, so one of the clerks would go get a can of peas for them.
Oh, of
Set it
beef
on the counter,
or beans?
or beans, or peas, or
Oh, okay.
corn. Or,
What about your meat? How would you sell meat if you didn't have plastic?
well, they'd sell
wait.
meat and they'd wrap it.
Your wife's gonna. We gotta get her a new one, I think.
You just probably you don't get a new one. You just flip it over.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay.
So sometimes, well, we'd buy meat. There'd be a meat salesman. There'd be a lot of salesmen in those days, traveling salesmen. And there was a meat salesman from Topeka that would come by, and he kind of stuttered a little bit, and he would to sell us meat, and he just had a slight speech impediment.
That's
But-
what you remember, but
Yeah. Well,
but he'd sell it like door to door in Effingham, or sell it to the
no,
grocery
he just
store.
sell it to stores.
And where would you keep it in the store?
We'd keep it in a refrigerator. We had electricity in the store.
But like not in a plastic
No,
anything.
no, it was. He just well, we'd buy maybe a half a beef at a time,
Okay.
or maybe a half a beef, 2 halves of beef, and then my dad would cut them up, and we'd sometimes butcher steers in the fall. And when we did that, there wasn't anything sanitary about that either. But I think some of that meat ended up being sold in a store.
Okay.
Now, if the FDA found that out,
Oh
they'd
no.
kill us.
Yeah.
But that was quite an operation too. Well, we'd butcher a steer and butcher hogs.
Yourselves?
Yeah, well, my dad would.
How did he learn how to do that?
I don't know.
Did
don't
you
know.
did you guys not did you guys have to help?
I did. I had to help.
How did that feel
Well,
for you?
Well, my job, he'd put a rope halter on a steer, and then he'd say, now hold on to that halter's head, and hold the halter, hold the head still. He'd stand there with a single-bladed axe and hit that head, and then knock the steer down, and then my dad would cut its throat. And then we had a block and tackle hooked to the rafters in that barn, and we just lift up. We'd hook the hind legs to a double tree, and we'd lift that steer up, and then they'd skin the steer, cut up the meat, cut the guts out, and we'd take them over to the hog pen and throw them in the hog pen.
What'd you do with the hog guts?
The hog guts we threw in the hog pen. But the hogs, you had to have, we'd scald the hogs. We'd build a fire. We'd have a 55-gallon barrel. We'd put water in there, and we'd build a fire in it until it boiled, until the water boiled. Then we'd dip the hog into that, and that would scald us. Then we'd scrape the hair off. We wouldn't skin the hog, we'd just scrape the hair off the hog.
Okay. Did you feel traumatized by that? Because I do.
Traumatized?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I didn't even know the word traumatized.
It was just what you did.
I think
Yeah.
you might have just traumatized Carl.
Yeah, I am. My therapist will be hearing about
Well,
this.
Well, well, if you'd ever see a calf born, maybe that would traumatize you too.
I think it would be beautiful though.
Yeah.
Anyways. Was your mom and dad loving to you, or did they hug you, stuff like that?
Never.
Neither?
Never.
Not even mom?
Not even mom.
Why?
I don't know.
Do you think it's because, in Germany, it's not, or
I guess so. I guess so.
Unworthy of their love?
Unworthy, yeah. That was probably it.
has that affected your self-confidence?
I don't know. I don't think so. Well, I was a sixth child, and they were always pretty busy.
But you knew that they loved you?
I think so.
Yeah.
But Grandpa, you stated before that, people showed love differently. The providing for was.
Was the love?
Yeah. Yeah. And well, and I don't think I ever saw my dad do anything endearing with my mother either.
Really?
Yeah.
Why? Why do you think that is?
Why did they not do that?
They loved each other, right?
I guess
But-
so.
Was it just surviving?
Well, I don't know. It was just different then.
Different.
And, well, my dad, one time I was standing in front of the mirror, flexing my muscles.
Are you serious?
Yeah. And my dad came by and he said, "Man, you could sure pitch a lot of hay." I was really pumped up. He said, "If you could knew how." And that's the most I ever remember my dad.
Complimenting you?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. What about like you were the high school quarterback, man?
But my dad did not understand football
Oh,
because he didn't play football.
okay.
He understood baseball, but not football. And so I think my dad went to a one ball game, and after the game he asked who won, and
Mm.
You just didn't even understand it.
no. And there was a guy that got hurt. Maybe a boy got killed or he died as a result of an injury, from a football injury in Effingham, before I played ball. And my dad, that really scared my dad.
Yeah, what was the safety like as the quarterback? Like, what did you have a helmet?
Oh yeah,
Did you have pads?
yes. And I played a single wing, which is, you don't see single wing anymore.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Well, I don't know.
I could Google it.
Yeah, you can Google it.
Okay.
Single wing?
Yeah,
So you have one wide receiver?
yeah, yeah, and it's really deceptive if it's run right. And single wing is really a lot of fun to watch, but you don't see it anymore. But a few years ago, there was a high school team, a good high school team, in the Kansas City area that played single wing. They were really fun to watch.
Do you know
Is that
who?
like snap under center with like an I formation with just one receiver?
Yeah, the quarterback was not under center.
He was not.
No. So I would line up just off guard, between a guard and a tackle. And they'd center the ball to a back. There was a halfback and a fullback back there. And sometimes I would go back and they'd hand me the ball. Then I'd wonder what the heck I was going to do with it. But anyhow, that's enough football.
Snap to the halfback, hand the ball to the quarterback, and then throw.
Yeah.
I guess the
something.
idea is
Kinda
you
bad.
could, it's like an option
Yeah.
minus,
It's like a direct snap.
it's a quarterback option.
Yeah.
No, it's a running back option. No, quarterback option.
It's like the opposite of the triple option.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. And just one more thing on football. I played both defense and offense.
Did everybody?
Well, most of the people did because, well, I don't know why. But it was I was a big fish in a very small pond.
Right.
I was maybe the only fish in there.
Is it 11-man football?
Yes. Yeah. And we played Holton and Hiawatha and Sabetha and
What
Troy.
made you want to play football?
I don't know. I guess because all my buddies did.
Okay. Grandma wrote this and I can't read her handwriting. Can you?
Oh, you gotta pick like 4 of them from the phone
Huh?
that haven't been answered. You gotta pick like 4 of them from later on down.
Yeah, callers.
I think we might have to do round 2
Let's take a
next
call.
week
You,
or
might,
something.
you really might need to do round
We've already
2.
done an hour.
Because you need to get to, he hasn't even met grandma in this
No.
story.
And we still have to go to the military.
This
Oh,
is just
yeah.
episode 1.
Yeah.
600.
Season
Yeah.
1.
in the podcast.
Are you gonna post these on YouTube for us?
Probably.
That'd be good.
Did you read the, what's the top thing say?
We should do post edits and
The
animate
top thing.
Yeah,
the stories.
I didn't read the top thing.
Make it silly.
that thing.
Farting and shit.
Oh, that's just, there was a family named Sternsdorf,
Yeah.
All the dead air.
and well, there were some unusual names, And when I took a speech class at KU, I had to give a humorous talk, so I just talked about all of the people with odd names from Effingham. And Horsty Sternsdorf was one of those.
What was the name?
Horsty was his first name.
Horsty.
And
Did you get an A on that?
yeah. And Sternsdorf was his last name. And Sebastian Helmstetter. And Horsty Sternsdorf's dad was a German immigrant.
Say horse.
and there was a rumor around the area that the old man Sternsdorf was a German sympathizer, and he had a shortwave radio in his barn in his hayloft. He was broadcasting all of the war effort from Effingham over to Berlin. And
Is that a rumor?
yeah, that was a rumor.
Never certified?
No. There wasn't any war effort in Effingham.
Did Horsey ever get any?
No.
The dad's name was Horsey, so it's Horsey Jr.
No, his dad's name was not Horsty. I don't remember what his dad's first name was.
Donkey.
You think if the kid was born and goes, that's a horsey right there?
Well, then there was Henry Budenbaum.
That's a German spy.
Yeah. And Sebastian Helmstetter, he had a still, and he made Blue Moonlight whiskey. And in the speech that I gave about him, I said that he had that still out south of the barn. Well, after the speech was over, the instructor said the best part of that speech was out south of the barn. And I guess he thought I was just a big hayseed. I'm sure the instructor did think I was a hayseed.
Because you described it like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, south of the barn. But Helmstetter, he got in trouble because the feds came and raided him, confiscated a truckload of sugar. And,
Oh.
When would this have been during Prohibition?
yes, it was during Prohibition, and the feds didn't like it because he was not paying federal stamps on the liquor. I don't think they cared that it was Prohibition.
Did people drink casually back then?
They drank seriously.
Oh.
And I
Mic drop.
asked my dad one time how Helmstetter's liquor was, and he said, I'd pay you more if I didn't have to drink it than if I did. Anyhow,
Okay, so you graduated high school.
Oh, you really do might need to do it.
I think
Are you trying to go to college?
just trying to get to Air Force first, right?
well, I went to Kansas State.
Yeah.
I
How'd you get
graduated,
there?
I graduated from high school. That summer I must have worked on a farm for Cookie Flory. And my buddy said, I'm going to go to Manhattan today and enroll. I said, well, I'll just go with you. So I did, and I enrolled, and I had a good time for 2 semesters. And I think maybe I passed everything, but not very good grades. Then that summer, I worked at the Pillsbury's elevator in Atchison with my brother John. And for that job, my brother John and I went there one Saturday morning, and we were just looking for a job. And the first place we stopped at was at Pillsbury's. And the guy said, yeah, well, I'll hire you both. But you have to pass a medical, so a physical exam. So we went to the doctor, and the doctor said, you boys hear when it's time for dinner? Yeah, we can hear good. I said, okay, your hearing's okay. Can you see what you have to eat? Yeah, we can see what we have to eat. Okay, your eyesight's okay. I passed you. That was the physical exam.
Easy.
And that summer, I worked on the Bull Gang, what was called the Bull Gang. So did John.
Can you say the word again?
Bull, B-U-L-L.
Bull.
Bull, like a bull.
Yeah.
Bull Gang. And it was just, see, they would get carloads of feed or carloads of ingredients in 100-pound bags, like bone meal and like fish bones. So we'd have to unload that. And then they'd make feed out of it, and then we'd have to load the feed into the cars. We did that 8 hours a day.
Wow. Were you like so exhausted at the end of the day?
No.
Why not?
Well, because I was young and full of...
There. So wait, I feel like I remember you saying something about when you went to K-State, your parents didn't understand why you wanted to go. Is that true?
No, I don't.
Okay, then I'm lying.
Were your parents excited you wanted to go get educated?
Well, if they were excited, they didn't show it. But they did not, they realized the value of education.
Okay.
But when I went to K-State in those days, freshman and sophomore had to take ROTC. It was required.
Wow.
I think because it was a land grant college. And so I was an ROTC guy.
Did you like it?
I didn't care. I liked it all right.
It's just a thing you
So I had to wear a uniform. And
Didn't you hitchhike there?
didn't I what?
Didn't you hitchhike there?
I hitchhiked home. I got homesick every weekend.
Oh.
So I'd hitchhike home to Effingham from Manhattan. And I could always get a ride over to Topeka on Highway 24 because there was a lot of traffic. But then when I got north of Topeka, one time there wouldn't be any cars coming along. If a car would come along, he'd pick me up, but sometimes there were no vehicles. But one time I got a ride with Ernie Barrett, and he was an All-American basketball player. He was later the athletic director at K-State. And he said, "I'm Ernie Barrett." And I said, "I'm Claire Kuckelman." He said, "Don't you know who I am?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'm an All-American basketball." He was really a nice guy. And he took me to Topeka. He was going to some meeting in Topeka. And one night, north of Oskaloosa, I rode with a farmer, and he had to turn off to go home. And I was standing out there in the dark, and so I walked up to a farmhouse, and I knocked on the back door, and this lady came to the door, and I said, "Could I come in and call my dad to come and get me?" She said, "Sure, come on in. And while you're here, I'll fix your dinner." And now she wouldn't even let me in the door. She would
No.
have shot me. But those days,
never approach the door now.
no, right. Those days were really different.
That's so sweet.
Yeah. And those people that gave me rides, they were always really kind.
You never felt
Some of them would
unsafe.
go out of their way to get me closer to Effingham.
Aw. So, you went to K-State, and then you left K-State.
Yeah, and then I worked that summer. Then I enlisted in the Air Force.
What made you enlist?
I don't know. I was subject to the draft.
Okay.
So I was either the Army or the Air Force. And so
What year would that have been? That you enlisted?
1952.
Okay. What made you choose Air Force?
I don't know.
Did you think it was cooler?
I like the uniform. It's blue.
Yeah. Are you glad you made that choice?
Well, it worked out just fine. I was really lucky in the Air Force.
So,
So I went to California for basic training. Then I went to Denver for tech school. Then I went to Japan.
to Japan?
Yes.
And I feel like I've heard you say Japan really was eye-opening for you.
It was. Well, the guys I worked with in Japan were really great guys. And that's really a shame. See, I got there in 1953, and just, 1946, we dropped the atomic bomb on them. So just that many years before, we would have been shooting at each other.
But you
But-
guys were friends.
Yeah. But they were not typical because they worked on a U.S. Air Base, so they could speak English and
Will you say what you told me in the car about how you were in charge of them, but
I was in charge of them, but they knew more about everything than I did. But I was in charge because we won the war. But they but they occasionally, maybe once a month or so, we'd have a party at one of their houses. I'd go up to the club and buy beer, and we'd go to their house. And I remember that they'd say, "Oh, say, okay, Kuckelman, we sing Kansas song. We sing your home song." And it'd always be "Home on the Range." And then they'd say, "Okay, now Kuckelman, we sing our song." And it would be some weird Japanese thing that
That's
I
so
couldn't even
fun.
begin to. But they were really great.
You never learned their home song?
No. But in our club, well, I had at that air base, I got a job in an airman's club, an enlisted man's club, and it was on the base, and I worked as a bouncer for a while.
Like at the door?
Well, no, I just walked the floor,
Okay.
but somebody had to check their tickets at the door, I think. But there were 3 guys on our shift. One guy was a great big guy, and the other guy was about my size. But if a fight broke out, we didn't do our job right. So on my shift, we never did have a fight. But anyhow, what I started to tell you was, they hired a Japanese band, maybe an orchestra, to play, and these GIs would dance. We hired girls to dance with them, Japanese girls. And the guy that hired me was the night manager. He got fired because he was playing around with some of the dancing girls.
Mm.
So then they moved me up. They promoted me to night manager.
Congratulations.
So then I didn't have to walk the floor. I just stayed in the office, and then if they had trouble out on the floor, they'd bring them in and talk to me. And I got paid extra for that.
Nice. Did less work.
Use a pick.
Pew! Pew!
It's a really nice way to say pick. I did not know that, Grandpa.
Is that one of those times when you were like, how did I end up doing this?
Well, I did. I don't know why the guy hired me, but I worked with him in base accounting office before I got transferred to the supply squadron. But I don't know why he hired me, but he did. And I worked there until maybe I don't know when I quit that job. But when I was working there, one Thanksgiving Day, they came and got me out of bed and said, "You're on orders to go to Okinawa." And I could not believe that. And I said, "Well, why would they want me in Okinawa?" Well, the Chinese were firing artillery shells on 2 offshore islands, Quemoy and Matsu. And I just read them in the news the other day,
Yeah.
Quemoy and Matsu. So somebody in Washington or somewhere wanted a wing of F-86s set up on Okinawa. Well, a wing in the Air Force includes so many accountants. So I was one of the accountants and they took people from all over the Far East and the Philippines and everywhere to make up this wing as fast as possible. So I got on this truck. They packed my duffel bag. Since it was permanent orders, I had to take all my gear with me,
Oh.
everything I owned. As it turned out, I came back to where I was, but I didn't know that at the time.
How did you end up in Japan and near your brother? How did that go down?
Well, when I first went to Japan, I was stationed way down on the southern island of Kyushu at Fukuoka. And it's a subtropical place, and it's not a very pleasant place.
You said your uniforms got mildewy.
Yeah, in the locker. So my brother was on Guam, and he wrote to Senator Carlson, who was a Kansas senator and who didn't know which county he was in. But he said, the Air Force does not have medical facilities to treat my skin rash on Guam. So they transferred him to Tokyo. When he got to Tokyo, he called me and said, "You ought to put in for a transfer." So I did, And I explained to the guys in the orderly room that I wanted to transfer to Tokyo. They said, we all want to go to Tokyo. I said, well, my reason is that my brother is stationed up there, and it would increase the morale of the Air Force if I was up there with my brother. So they transferred me to a base that command had that's closest to my brother's. So I wasn't on the same base with my brother.
But you got to hang out and stuff?
Yes.
That's nice.
So that's how I got up there. And that was to Yokota Air Force.
Were you ever homesick?
Homesick? I don't think so. But I thought in Japan that I was there for 2 years, so I thought everything must stop back here.
You know, everything stopped.
Wait for me to come home. So when I come home, I was walking down the street of Effingham, and I met a guy that I'd known all my life, and he said, have you been gone? Here, I'd been gone for 2 years. And right then I realized that they didn't care that I was gone.
Who's that?
Your neighbor, isn't it? Howdy. How are you? What's that?
John's not here.